ばこの落ち葉くんのお話をハッピーエンドにできるかなって。
Well, normally I would recommend Yuki, but I hear from Nico that she's not too reliable with that sort of stuff. This week, we open with Mashiro, again working on her picture book based off of the story ideas she got from Monda. However, she ended up writing herself into a corner, pretty much like many Precure writers, which, by the way, looking forward to how we can flesh things out with the Kaiserin with just 5 more episodes left. But yeah, this was meant to be a follow-up to, honestly, Batemonda's perfectly good resolution from a couple weeks ago. Yeah, I know what I said at the end of last week's review, but really thinking about it, I do kind of wish they had stuck with this as the ending for reasons that we'll get to by the end of this review. Anyway, the next day, Mashiro was deep in thought, I think. Hey Mashiro, is that flour on your toast or something else? Nah, of course, she was thinking about her picture book that was supposed to be for the contest, but she actually forgot about her initial goal. Fair enough, as it did show that the contest had become irrelevant, and she just wanted to write a good book that would at least be appreciated by those close to her, which is admirable. Problem was that she also was writing for this gaslighter, who she wanted to get some advice from, and he didn't take too well for using his likeness without his permission. As a result, he recreated his cohorts act from the first episode and evened out himself. But again, to his credit, he was at least the most effective of the show's mostly ineffective rogues gallery. And just like the rest of the show, you took your sweet ass time with that. But yeah, while I have my issues with this episode that we will get to, I will say at least Mashiro was unquestionably the best part of this, as rather than being overly shocked by Batemonda's reveal, or even immediately trying to get her pen back, she dealt a much more significant blow to the Cricket Man. And no, she wasn't stupid enough to just forget about her pen, and also did ask for it back as a means of helping him, and it actually would have worked had paranoia not kicked in and he retreated. And by the way, does any of this feel kind of familiar? I mean, we've got a white cure trying to help an antagonist who's caught between two worlds as they mostly confront each other in the rain, while the villain grasps something very important to the plot. I can't quite put my finger on it, but I'm sure it'll come to me later. Anyway, Sora later helped her waifu home. Elsewhere, Batemonda encountered someone he really didn't want to meet, though Skirehead did at least realize that he had some value, probably way more than himself, and decided to give him the old ultimatum. Oh, come on, dude. You couldn't even be barred to turn it into a creepy mask. Back with Mashiro, she continued to be the best part of this episode, as she did rightfully acknowledge that Batemonda had indeed been tricking her this whole time, but she couldn't bring herself to be upset at him, she just pitied him. This was because, as we've been pointed out in a previous review, they did parallel each other in a lot of ways, with the only big difference being that they were on opposite ends of the moral spectrum. Thus, even though he had done a few bad things, including almost destroying both Skyland and her hometown, and mentally tortured and traumatized her waifu to the point that she blue screened for a couple of episodes, and also in hindsight took a bunch of chances to gaslight her and Yeah, Mashiro, are you sure you don't want to give this guy the Darizin treatment? Anyway, they encountered Batemonda the next day, along with his own gaslighter. Seemingly left with no other options, he took in the power that turned Minotone into a junkie, though in this case, he just stopped at Skinny Broly. And his power level is 8,968. Close but no cigar. Well, that is unless we go with the original Japanese, which in that case... And again, in spite of all the legit terrible things he had done, Mashiro, being the sweetheart that she was, still tried to defend Batemonda from the insults of the guy who really has absolutely no right to call anyone else useless. Don Thousand, we all know the over 100 numbers are overrated as all hell, so stop trying to act like some kind of evil mastermind and not just some cheater with some cheap-ass cards. And sure enough, even Judai managed to overtake him, wanting to prove that he could decide his own destiny.
Oh, come on! You gotta admit this is cool!
Again, there's really good stuff here that prevents me from even saying this was a bad episode, but there is an element that I'm not crazy about. Though it certainly wasn't the fight of this episode, as while the actual animation quality was pretty low, I mean god, this looks like Dragon Ball Super territory, it was good in the sense that it did have the intensity of all the cures coming together to try and stop Bataroli, and yet effectively being thrown around, again proving why the show won't have any more decent antagonists after this episode. But on that note, let's talk about how all of this resolves, and my biggest issue with this episode. Masho managed to find the literal little bit of good left in her enemy's heart, and I guess when upgraded version of her finisher managed to mostly purify him before topping it off with the Chronicle to complete the job. Afterwards, Batamondo apologized to everyone, including Sora.
反省しているんですよね。だったらこれ以上私から言うことは何もありません。
Are you sure about that?
So yeah, I'm left conflicted with this resolution. On the one hand, while I was kind of joking with the Daris and stuff, let's also not forget that this guy has been all kinds of toxic and destructive to the point that his sins shouldn't be so easily forgiven. I could understand forgiving Kabuto, as the worst thing he really did was rip up a journal, and Minotaur literally did nothing wrong, but Batamonda?
I don't know.
Also, I swear to god, I don't want to see any more Masho/Batamonda art. If anything, I kind of wish they had taken more from the classic Dai episode that they're clearly emulating here with the final battle with Kirya. I mean, the setup was right there. Have Batamonda commit at least one act of heroism before being completely taken over by the evil energy. The Precure would desperately try to snap him out of it, but at the last minute, either Spearhead or the Kaiserin, who I remind you did also try to off Kabuto, would deal the finishing blow. It would signify how serious things are getting as we approach the endgame of the show, and generate at least some sense of threat from these villains. But no, we just ended with a predictable redemption, and Batamonda having, in my opinion at least, a less satisfying exit than episode 41's. With all that said, did I think this was a bad episode on its own? No, definitely not. I mean, if anything else, this was one of Masho's best episodes. Maybe not a personal favorite, but easily one of her best outings as the one cure of this team who's gone through the most significant hero's journey. My issues with Batamonda's redemption are obviously a lot more personal, but what isn't quite as personal is the fact that our episode count is starting to wind down. Looking back on it, I think one of the strongest elements of Batamondo's original departure at the end of 41 was the ambiguity behind it. He wasn't easily forgiven for anything, as the Precure never discovered who he was, but by that same token, he had to live with that fact and remain in hiding while seeking some form of closure and salvation on his own. Whether he found it or not was left up to the imagination, which to me is often a superior ending for many characters, in particular unredeemed villains. And yet, this episode redeemed really the only truly effective villain in the show, whose laundry list of misdeeds was given the pass. It just leaves me more conflicted rather than satisfied like I was with 41. It's almost the same feeling I got from Narcissus' redemption, though at least this guy had a few more episodes under his belt. And also, fortunately for this episode, it was absolutely held up by the sweetness of Mashiro, who is the one true hero girl of this show. She did try to help Batamonda, whilst never forgetting her primary objective of defeating the villains. Just her at least trying to get her pen back showed that she was at least very forward-thinking, and not blinded entirely by optimism, just kind of. Regardless, a good and very amiable showing from her, which is something I like to see. All that said, I also kind of wish we could have skipped this one and just gone to next week's episode. If some reports are to be believed, this show will run for 48 episodes, meaning that we only have 5 episodes left to resolve things, maybe 4 depending on how big of an epilogue they'll have. In that sense, this episode could have been better spent at least building up the threat of the Empire, which remains at an all-time 0. Thus, overall, while this episode on its own is a good strong character building episode for Mashiro, she really doesn't need any more at this point, nor did Batamonda need any more closure. I didn't dislike it, but in a post-Darizan world, can we please stop forgiving these assholes? Work on the first part of the Max Heart review actually went a lot better than I originally thought it would. Yeah, honestly, I thought we'd have more distractions like the announcement of the next season, but No, I just couldn't get that excited about it, so we just did a short. Thus, we may get the Max Heart review out this week, if not the next. So look forward to it. Until then, though, for now, my friends.
This can go two ways, punk.
Yeah, so did someone tell him that Velma was getting a second season? Well, okay then. Gotta find a new Earth now.